وننتقل معكم الآن حضورنا الكريم إلى جلستنا الحوارية الأولى في اليوم الثاني من هذا المنتدى، وستكون بعنوان كالتالي، ألا وهو متطلبات التعليم والبحث العلمي في الاقتصاد المعرفي. Now is the time for the first session for the second day of the forum, which about the requirements of education and scientific research in the knowledge economy. وهذه الندوة الجلسة الأولى حضورنا الكريم راح نتكلم عن دور الجامعات ومراكز البحث العلمي في إنتاج المعرفة، بالإضافة إلى تحول مناهج مصممة لمحو أمية التعليم إلى مناهج مصممة لمحو أمية المعرفة والابتكار. ونتكلم أيضا عن مراكز البحث العلمي والمؤسسات التعليمية والأكاديمية تعتبر نواة الأسواق المعرفية. وراح يكون طبعا حضورنا الكريم المحاور the moderator of this session, which will be the resident representative of UNDP in Kuwait, Hediko Hezilich, and also for the first guest it will be the higher education expert, Dr. Takeshi Anajiru, and the second guest will be expert in national economic development, Dr. Stephen Kriesel, and also our third guest, he will be Dr. Adel Hseinan from Abdullah Salim University. والآن حضورنا الكريم تبدي معاكم هذه الجلسة الحوارية الأولى. And now Ms. Hediko Hezilich, the mic is yours and you are the moderator. The mic and the light and the air is yours. Yes.
Okay, thank you so much. Well, what a start by Her Royal Highness Sheikh Intisar. Always inspiring. Just a second. Let me switch off the interpretation. Okay, great. So I welcome you in the third session. And we're going to talk about the roles of research and higher education in knowledge economy. Not only labor supply side, but also labor demand side and its linkages. I'm Hideko Hajiarich from UNDP, your moderator for the next 1 hour. Distinguished panelists are with us today from Kuwait, Europe, and Asia. Let me start with Dr. Adel Al-Hseinan. Professor Adel teaches at the College of Business Administration at Kuwait University. As one of the very dynamic professors in the country, he started up exciting initiatives such as entrepreneurship and business incubator, the World Trade Organization unit, and many other in the field of finance, insurance, and statistical programs at the Center of Excellence in Management at the university. Professor Adel has PhD in Applied Statistics, the University of California. The next panel, Dr. Stephen Kriesel, is an expert in economic field and public sector reform. He has advised more than 20 governments plus corporate clients in the Middle East and beyond. Stephen has served Kuwait's government and several public institutions over a decade. He was involved in the initial development of the Kuwait Vision 2035. Stephen is a senior advisor at the Boston Consulting Group, and previously he was with the Tony Blair Government Advisory Practice, McKinsey, and the World Bank. Stephen has PhD from the University of Heidelberg, Germany, and Master of Public Administration from Harvard University. Finally, but not least, please meet Dr. Takeshi Yanagiura. Takeshi-san is a higher education policy advisor and has supported institutional, state, and national clients to develop sustainable research-based strategies. Dr. Takeshi developed the Institutional Research Office for the University of the District of Columbia. He also serves as research director for the Tennessee Higher Education Commission. He also consulted on higher education data and research issues, both nationally and internationally. Takeshi-san has a PhD in education and economics from Columbia University. Professor Takeshi is currently teaching at Tsukuba University, known for science, in Japan. So, a kickstart question for all of you, but I'd like to start with Professor Adel. So, Professor Adel, in relation to knowledge economy, what's your vision for building up Kuwait's human capital? Over to you.
Thank you very much, Hadiku. I might be having a little technical audio problem with packets cutting a little bit, but I am catching up so far. I don't know if you hear me well. Thank you for the invite, and I welcome the panelists to the session. Given that we were assigned as a constituents board to establish a new government university in the state of Kuwait, which is the second university, and being assigned to be the general secretary of the board, there has been a lot of efforts to sense around what are the gaps and the missing aspects of higher education in Kuwait, given that there are a number of operational universities, mainly private, and the oldest university is Kuwait University, of course, from which I was seconded to Abdullah Salim project. We have conducted lots of meetings and seminars, and we have investigated and reviewed lots of literature studies about higher education in Kuwait, about the manpower, and tried to link all these to the Kuwait 2035 vision, which is going to be based on knowledge economy. And the element of the Kuwait economy is very obvious, being a single source economy. Abdullah Salim University vision is to try to close these gaps and try to be a catalyst and an aid in realizing the Kuwait Vision 2035 in terms of building an institution that build all of its systems, whether academic or administrative, on IT, artificial intelligence, machine learning, data science, and this is all encapsulated within a knowledge economy direction or directives that would focus mainly on the human resources and capitalizing on the development and improvement of the skills, abilities, and knowledge of the human capital in the state of Kuwait, of course. So the law 76/2009 about public universities, which replaces the old law 29/1966, under which Kuwait University was established, now has a few features and characteristics that would enable public universities to act as catalysts and providers of manpower to the knowledge economy in Kuwait. There are two articles actually that pertain to what we are working on for developing and initiating the Abdullah Salim University. The first article, of course, is Article 40, which really dictates that by the publishing the Law 76/2019, automatically Abdullah Salim University is established. The second one is the description of the public universities in the law, which dictates that the public universities are autonomous, independent in terms of the administrative and financial aspect of the meaning of independence, have the right to ownership. And a right to ownership means that the universities can, after all these years, universities, public universities can start companies, own companies, spin-off companies, which means that the main engine for creating opportunities and helping and aiding in diversifying the Kuwait economy would be able to facilitate through those universities, given the power of the law, which is the description of the legal status of such universities. There are a lot to be said and talked about, but I don't know if you want to take over, Hadiko, if you have any further elaboration or questions.
Sure. Certainly, I will get back to you, Professor Adler, particularly on your insights on the strategic areas for human capital development. So next, I'm going to move to Dr. Stefan. Question to you is, some universities and research centers succeed in advancing knowledge economy, while others not. So please tell us what key elements of success so far.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. First of all, talking about key success factors, I would like to congratulate Dr. Adel already for his initiatives, because when he mentioned the different elements, I saw a lot of the key success factors which we can see when we look around the world. And I would actually like to point out three different ones. The first one is the strategic focus of the institute. The second one I would call something like customer orientation. And the third one would be the way to teach and incentivize performance and the transfer of knowledge. So let me give you a couple of examples. The strategic focus for these institutes who want to be players in the knowledge economies. First of all, of course, you need to choose a topic of the future, topic where the country, where your nation can have a competitive advantage and where there will be future demand for labor. For Kuwait, for example, energy is an obvious choice, but Kuwait, of course, has to make the step from being an oil producer to being an energy provider. And for that, a lot of research and understanding is necessary. So that's why this is a very good choice. An interesting example here is South Korea, actually, which already 15 years ago decided to say, we want to become a player in the green growth, in the green economy area. And they decided to set up the Green Growth Institute, and they redesigned a lot of their policy in this direction. A lot can be learned from this example. So you need to look at what are these competitive sectors, but you also need to look where do you have local needs and where do you have the ability to finance it. In Kuwait, as we know, a lot of people work in the public sector, but I do not yet see that we have a real modern leadership academy where, which is linked to the knowledge economy, to everything which is needed in a very modern way. And here, Estonia could be a good example, which, is nowadays considered as one of the most innovative countries. And they did it via looking at their digital orientation of the state, for example, where they are like one of the benchmarks. They have the Tallinn Institute for Technology and do a lot of research around that. In Kuwait, another area is healthcare, where Kuwait is very generous, spends a lot of money on it, but a lot of the money goes to my own country, Germany, where people travel to. So a lot of this could actually be used to become a player in the region, and research will be necessary. I would see defense as a similar area. Kuwait spends a lot of money, but mainly for exports, and we know from other countries that the defense sector can quite important to develop the high-tech area. So that's the first focus, the strategic focus. The second one is customer orientation, an expression which comes more from the private sector, but it's quite important. If the university should go beyond the role of production and transfer of knowledge, it needs to see itself more as an enabler for individuals, for the society, and for the private sector. So that's about this whole shift of students, of individuals not going only once to university, but about supporting lifelong learning. This can happen by leveraging, for example, the alumni network, by doing more courses in executive education, leadership programs, etc. It needs to have a role for the society, where the university and these research centers need to go beyond knowledge creation. They are the talent pool, but they also need to think about the network effects which are necessary. They need to be a convener of the different players, academia, private sector, and society. And that's where we have all the discussion around the clusters. So universities and institutes which are linked to clusters of economic development are typically more successful. And of course, for the private sector as well. And here it's about, of course, the direct impact of creating the labor supply and supporting lifelong learning in the corporate sector, but also the commercialization of the product knowledge and the startup culture. So that's the third part. And the last part, just shortly, it's about the right way to teach and incentivize. Of course, there's a lot of research now about the modern didactics, about creativity, teamwork, experiential learning, gamification, etc. But you know, beyond the didactics, which you can learn from the literature about the knowledge economy, we also need to think very well about the incentives for the knowledge transfer. And Dr. Adel mentioned already the new laws in Kuwait, which will be very helpful. You need to think about how you can not only incentivize the institutions, but also the players there, the professors, how can they benefit from the transfer as well. So that is one element. You need to think about the autonomy of this institution, but you also need to think about the excellence. So how can you drive performance in those areas? And that you typically have by, you know, competition also among the faculties, between schools, and by linking the funding mechanisms to performance. So that's also a very important aspect. So these three are typically areas where those institutes which perform very well are excellent.
Thank you so much, Dr. Stefan. And over to Takeshi-san. As Dr. Stefan already alluded, you know, universities and research centers are often and always the engine of fostering the labor supply side, but not necessarily always the other way around. So could you tell us about some concrete examples, you know, universities and research centers contributing to labor supply side, labor demand side, excuse me.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. And I maybe like I can my answer could be more probably what we need to think about first is, before going to the specific example, we need to think about sort of conceptual framework of what university can do in terms of supply and demand. And conceptually, there are supply and demand aspects for skilled jobs in the local labor market. So to grow economy, we need skilled jobs. And the university actually are capable of making contribution to both supply and demand side. And what Dr. Stefan is talking about is the supply side, and also in the demand side as well. But starting with the supply side, which is education, universities can increase the number of college graduates locally. So that's the direct way of contribution to the local economy. And then if residents have enough skill to be prepared for skilled jobs like energy or healthcare, you know, they can grow the economy. But for now, let's set aside whether universities are sufficiently training future workforce. That's another important question, and that's where the curriculum matters. But on the side of demand side, that's the research function. And that's like a research and development, and academic research is particularly. And in economic literature, it's called knowledge spillover from academic research. So academic research has, like, you know, faculty, they like to pursue their own research interests. Sometimes they do it just for the sake of their interest, but sometimes their knowledge is so valuable that people from industry, they want to come to faculty to learn. Please teach us like what you learn. And that's called knowledge spillover. And what the research has been saying is that spillover is the key functionality of university to stimulate the demand, because it attracts firms seeking knowledge spillover. And there is lots of evidence around that in the past study, particularly in the US and Europe. And also it's known to stimulate the business innovation. And actually, by learning the knowledge from university, the private sector, they can set up their own research lab to do their own research, and they hire people from local universities. So that's business innovation. And also it's known to attract the high-tech startups. That's where really skill, knowledge spillover is very strong, and also increase the employment in STEM jobs. So university research activities have been known to increase the employment of skilled workers and contribute eventually to the growth of human capital in the region. So what I like to talk about is to really make economic growth in the local area, you need to have a strong research. And then, because that's the key, otherwise there's no growth in human capital in that area. Because to create the jobs, you need both supply and demand. And education is on the supply side. But to really grow the economy, you need to have an intervention from the demand side. And that's where research comes in. And it's not just the regular research. It's about the knowledge which has a spillover. So given this kind of conceptual understanding, two important question, I think, that comes out for Kuwait policymakers, like what kind of question they should think about is what kind of knowledge spillover that the farms in Kuwait are looking for. That's one thing that policymakers should be thinking about, because individual faculty, they tend to ignore those, knowledge spillover. They don't care. They just want to do research, whatever they interested in. So in a way, the role policymaker can play is to sort of direct the research interests of faculty to the needs of local and national economy. And the second is what kind of skill university in Kuwait is preparing students for. So stimulating demand is one thing, but also they need to prepare the future workforce to do the job. So those are the sort of kind of conceptual framework of university in terms of how they can affect local economy. But my point is that actually stimulation to demand play a huge role in the local economic growth. So maybe I should stop here before going to further, but yeah, I will get back to you. Yeah. So
certainly, Take-san, we're going to get back to you with some concrete, interesting example on the second round. And it's so interesting in your conceptual framework, because in Japan, we often see that the research institute are part of the particular company, like Mitsubishi and then so forth. So it's a direct linkages between market and then research as well. So very interesting. Also, Stefan mentioned about the three strategic, three key elements of success. Number one is a strategic area, and number two is clustering. But then I'd like to go back to Professor Adel on the strategic areas in which Kuwait has a potential to grow human capital. Over to you, Professor.
Thank you very much. It's pretty much around what Stefan has mentioned. Kuwait naturally, geographically, has competitive advantages in terms of being a natural hub and a port for the region. This is something very important. Thus, logistics, supply chain, is something that is very important to prepare manpower to be serving in that direction. In addition to what Stefan mentioned earlier, actually as under establishment university, Abdullah Salem University founding board members are very keen to start from day one linkages with local businesses, and mainly the oil sector, the K companies, we call them the K companies, and trying to build up the network of serving the needs of these companies in terms of producing caliber, cater to needs to supply human resources, in addition to bring in issues and problems to the research centers. Now, what really is a differentiating factor for Abdullah Salem University is it is directed to be a research-based university. Up till now, we have about proposed 10 centers. One of them is energy and renewable energy. One of them is oil and gas. These research centers, they need the strong linkages and channels open with the oil sector. In addition to the other activities that Abdullah Salem sees that it has to entice and improve on in terms of SMEs and corporate size businesses that can really work within the factors that are entertained and are advantages to Kuwait and the Kuwaiti population. Of course, you know that Kuwait population and GCC in general, relatively, it's very young generation, very young population. If we say about 25 years or less, probably it comes up to 50% of the population is 25 or less. And that's why it is very much needed to offer what a fourth generation university ought to offer in terms of the needs of the market in the time being, as well as the outlook of the future, where the economies are heading and where Kuwait should position itself. And this is all in light of the Vision 2035. Of course, healthcare is something very important. There is some kind of an advantage of this newly born university that it inherited a number of locations that used to be operated by Kuwait University. The capacity in total was up to 50,000 students for those locations. And by the law also, all these locations are transferred to Abdullah Salem University. Now, this is an awkward situation where we have so much facilities, so much good infrastructure, but we are just starting the school. And of course, this puts pressure on the founding board to really manage the daily matters as well as trying to build the academic aspect of the institution. And research is the priority for that institution. From the research will produce programs, and those programs in nature are interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary. So they are really responsive to the needs of the market in the time being and looks for the outlook of the future. And that's why knowledge economy is a must, is a main infrastructure of all what we do in sciences, in business, leadership, fintech, risk management. All these should be based on the idea of it has to be technology based, has to be utilizing all the infrastructure and the tools that can be available for artificial intelligence, machine learning, as well as employing a strong data science aspect of all the disciplines and all the programs that are offered by Abdullah Salem University. Now, there are issues and hurdles that are faced by the institution, given the government system, the red tape, the different organizations that have relation and impact on such an institution, being a government institution, which is mainly publicly funded. But nevertheless, there is a lot of ideas to seek systems of securing research fund, which is something that is very important. It's a big issue for Kuwait University, at least, to secure research fund. And as rightfully Takeshi said, the public policy of the government should be supportive of research and giving high rise to the value of research in terms of developing private, public, and sector and the community as the country as a whole. This is a shortcoming, but Abdullah Salim University is trying to seek alternatives. And one thing that Stefan mentioned earlier is the clustering. No single academic institution can work separately and alone in isolation. Everybody now looks for clusters, and from early on, the founding members were seeking to secure agreements and memorandums of understandings with a number of international universities in the West and the East, all over. And so far, we have been successful. Actually, as we speak, yesterday, we had a delegation coming from Australia. I wouldn't mention the university, but there was a delegation coming, visiting from Australia, and it was very fruitful, very good meeting. And of course, networking and clustering among institutions, especially for the sake of research, exchange of faculty, students, knowledge, as well as technology is very critical in helping and aiding the country and through the academic institutions, which are, of course, that's very easy for academicians to build up relations, less routine, less formalities, and things can work quickly. And this can add to helping the economy as a whole.
Thank you so much, Professor Adel. It's an excellent point. Stefan, let's deep dive on clustering then, which was also highlighted by Professor Adel and one of the key elements of success. So why it's so important? And could you tell us more about it? Over to you.
Yes, I mean, just empirically, we know that those, if we have a university research institute which wants to be relevant for society and economy, then it's those who are linked to very specific clusters who are more successful in this area. So I'm very happy that these initiatives are going on in Kuwait at the moment. I'm actually an economist by training, and when and nowadays the economists would say the role of government needs to shift from operator to regulator. But there's one area where the economists would argue that the public sector still needs a very important and key role, and that is around those clusters where they can be the convener. So not only the universities wouldn't be only providing labor force or so, but they need to be the convener, because in the knowledge economy, the whole networking, the free flow of talent, of innovative ideas is very important. So not only that those people talk to each other, but that there's a shift that people from the private sector might do courses in the university does their own research, does their application maybe, and then people shift between those areas also in their personal careers. So that's very, very much important. And Kuwait has an advantage in terms of the size, because for a cluster, what it means is also always some geographic proximity. And in a way, given that Kuwait is not so big and everybody knows each other, that can be one advantage. So because cluster could mean different things. It could be a whole industrial area like the Silicon Valley, for example. It could be specially designed hubs and parks, or it could be like specific incubators, where you focus on a very specific ideas, and then through this collaboration you start you hope to develop a startup scene. Now, beyond that, I would like to also maybe stress another point which Dr. Adel mentioned, which is the financial support. Leading nations like the ones I mentioned before, but also, like if you look at the innovation index, all the leading nations, they spend 3% of GDP and more on research. And Kuwait, which has a very specific challenge that Kuwait needs to change the whole structure of the economy, only spends 0.5%. So there's still quite a catch-up effect needs to happen. The money doesn't only have to come from the public sector. In most countries, it's, you know, like more than 50% comes from the private sector. But the public money can be an incubator. It can support and build up institutions. And then, of course, if the private sector feels that this is helpful for their development, they will also contribute. In recent years, there were a lot of big programs where countries and regions said we need to prepare for a transition. They started huge programs like in the US, the Advanced Research Projects Agency is one of the big players. They have like close to 4 billion in budget. And the EU has probably now one of the biggest funds where they say, they make available about 3% of GDP for research and investigations within Europe. And that goes on top of national contributions. So the program is called Horizon Europe, where they have a very interesting mechanisms, how they screen opportunities, how they incentivize universities, how they make sure that these initiatives are oriented towards the future. So that's something which I think there's still quite some room in Kuwait to support these initiatives and invest more.
Thank you so much. Then over to Takeshi. Somehow coming back to the first question, which is the linkages between labor supply and demand side. And, also as Stefan mentioned, Kuwait has a relatively small country, geographically. So could you tell us some examples of relevance from countries of relevance? Over to you.
Sure. And I guess this is also, I like to a little bit talk about corporate universities. Hideko-san mentioned that there's some corporate has some research function in Japan. And then, so I like to talk a little bit about my experience in Japan and my observation in Japan to answer some of your questions. And probably this is more having to do with non-successful example rather than successful example. And what I mean by that is, so yes, you're right that Japan has a lot of big corporations. They have their own R&D activities, R&D function within a company, like Toyota has it and Mitsubishi has it. But that is not really possible for many firms in Japan. And those companies, they exist a long time and they have a strong financial capacity to develop their own R&D function, but not really, most of the companies don't have that kind of capacity. So particularly new startup, they need to, when they start up something, they don't have R&D capacity, so they need to turn to academics. I mean, ideally, they like to come to somewhere to get some knowledge. And that's what I mean. That's what I'm talking about spillover in the previous conversation. And then that is not happening in Japan so much. And then I like to kind of talk about my recent study, which we are about to release in a few weeks as a preprint. But what we did is that we look at the economic relationship between private university and local economic growth in Japan since 1955. And like many other countries in the world, not many, but in Japan, majority of higher education in Japan is actually small private institution. We have 800 universities in Japan, but for 80%, they are small private institution with median enrollment of roughly 1,500. So it's very small, a low research capacity. So to sum up, my finding is that we found no economic impact of those universities on local community. And that's primarily because of the lack of research. They don't have research outputs. So because they are teaching-oriented institution and they don't have a capacity to conduct research. So what happened is that, so they supply the college graduates, but they did not stay there. So they kind of migrated out to other area like big city like Tokyo or those big area where the jobs are there. So firms did not really they did not seek out the knowledge from those institutions, right? So that's why they didn't come to those local area. Therefore they did not create the jobs. So that's why what I mean by the linkage is missing in Japan, and that's probably why corporate has its own research function, because they cannot really come to university. And yeah, there are some strong universities in Japan, but that's not enough to probably promote economic growth in everywhere. So it's more like a limited impact in that area, certain area. So I think kind of counter, so I'm kind of deflecting your question by answering non-successful example of university and economies relationship. But in a way, that's kind of proving my point that the research is very important. And then, like Stefan said, like public, they need to really spend more funding to R&D so that university can conduct research. So that's my remark.
Thank you so much. I think sharing the unsuccessful stories and analyzing, that's the art of professors, I think. So anyway, this is our last round of questions, 5 minutes each, if okay. I want to go back to Professor Adel. What will be your key recommendations for the state of Kuwait and the private sector in building human capital relevant to sustainable economic growth? Over to you.
Thank you, Hadiku, for the excellent maneuvering and running the session and giving the time to everybody. This is the $1 million question. It is hard, yet it is short. It will take us another round of a panel to discuss this thing. But anyways, if universities are strategically considered to be elements of change, support, and improvement to the economy and diversification to the economy of Kuwait, more freedom and academic independence should be secured for those institutions to be agile, flexible, adaptive, to be able to provide in terms of producing fit manpower, in terms of skills, innovation abilities, as well as being adaptive and mobile, easy to go around and shift from one task to the other. In addition to being able to bring in issues, problems, and needs of the society, of the community, and the economy, specifically to the research centers and the table of discussions, and then producing solutions to the economy. There has to be also more importance and elevation of the priority of research and research funding in terms of playing a strategic role in decision support. Everybody talks about research is important. We have to base our decisions on data science, and we have to take wise decisions. Yet, when it comes to funding, no, this is not a priority to support. So this is very important. Of course, there is a number of corporates that have the sense of responsibility to support research as part of their social responsibility. But yet, the main provider is public funding. And the main client to these and most beneficiary to these activities and outcomes is the government sector by large. Especially in Kuwait, it's like 93% of employment is the government. Of course, Stefan alluded to the role playing of government and the private sector. Government should reduce its involvement in running businesses and being the main competitor of the private sector. So the size of government should be shrink to the level where it can play its main role of being a supervisor and audit and controller of competitiveness and fairness in terms of running the economy. The economic opportunities that are possible now under this new law 76/2019 is that universities, whether Kuwait University, Abdullah Salam University, or the new universities, public universities are going to be established by the power of that law, will be able to be very much open and interactive with the community in terms of producing employers rather than employees, whether they start their small businesses or their large corporates. It is very much possible, as well as helping in creating the opportunities and the economic diversification through reducing the pressure on the Civil Service Commission to employ lines of graduates of university students, as well as public training authority graduates, and having an inflation and overemployment in the public sector, which really hinders the efficiency and the quality of service that are provided by the government. The social and cultural development is very important, whether it's environmental, societal, or addressing the issues that are faced by the community is something very important as creating the businesses to resolve issues and problems which reduce a lot of expenses, not to be sending too many people to Stefan's country to receive healthcare, being preventive from day one. So we can save money, and we hope this money that we save sending to Germany and to the US and Europe by supporting research for research institutions and academic institutions. Thank you very much for this opportunity. Thank you for the excellent management of the panel. It gives me pleasure that I have joined you as a team member with Tikashi and Stefan, and the opportunity given to us to talk a little bit about Abdullah Salam University. By the way, it is only 1.5 years old. The board has been established, and so far we have conducted more than 50 weekly meetings, and subcommittee meetings are ongoing as we speak now. There are a couple of meetings are going on, and hopefully we can hand over this project, and hopefully in a few years we can talk about a success story, not like what Takeshi is looking for, failure stories in Japan. Thank you very much.
Shukran Gezilan, Professor Adel, very, very inspiring. So the last question to Stefan, we discussed a lot about the role of the university in the knowledge economy. And how does this all relate to the overall situation and reform needs in the education sector in Kuwait in order to prepare the young generation for the challenges of the future?
Well, that's a good question. Actually, when I told a Kuwaiti friend that about the panel here and that where I will participate, he said, well, let's make sure our kids learn how to read and write at an acceptable level, and then we can talk about the fancy stuff. Now, we all know that reform in primary and secondary education is very urgent in Kuwait. However, I think this can't be an argument against establishing very advanced and somewhat elite tertiary educational institutes and research institutes. But it's also clear that this can be only the start of an educational transformation. Now, it's a different topic to discuss what is necessary in education. Many areas which we addressed for higher education are also necessary if you want to reform the primary, secondary education, like the whole drive for performance, etc. And a lot of stuff is known. In fact, the interesting thing is that the government, the leadership is very much aware of the needs. The Zionist, the Emir, and the Prime Minister mention education reform as a priority. And if you look at the National Development Plan, all the the work Dr. Khaled Mahdi is doing and his team, then you see that most of the urgent reform needs, they are identified and proposals are there. So in Kuwait, the question is not so much the what, but more the how. How do we make it happen? A lot of people know what has to happen, but how do we get the political support for the turnaround, for the educational modernization? How do we get the support of the parliament? How do we get the support of the teachers and the teachers union and the support of religious groups? So that's, I think, the biggest challenge for Kuwait at the moment. And there, this idea of the knowledge economy might be helpful in two ways. I think the first one is that the knowledge economy and all the research which has been done, all the experience which we have now can create a lot, can provide a lot of technological enablers, or maybe even psychological enablers, as we heard in the previous session, which help us to leapfrog some of the necessary reforms. For example, web-based learning allows personalization. Even web-based exams, they create transparency, allow national and international comparison, and make it easier to do performance management. So there might be some of the benefits which Kuwait can learn from these developments and these experiences. And then secondly, I would say it could also be helpful in communicating that a radical transformation of the way of teaching and learning is necessary. So in a way, the idea of the knowledge economy can be helpful to galvanize minds and efforts to support in the political discussion, to create this bigger support of the different stakeholders in Kuwait to go from the knowing what has to happen to really make it happen.
Thank you so much. Stefan's point and Professor Adler's points are really complementing each other beautifully. Thank you so much. And Takeshi-san, I will not let you walk away only with the unsuccessful stories. So what are the cutting-edge examples for the public-private partnerships? Over to you.
Yeah, and I do not like to walk away with the answers, for example, alone. So I kind of like to talk about my kind of personal experience at Stanford University. I was a postdoc a few years ago, and then Stanford is a private university, but it's a university. So I'm kind of showing the example of what government can help private industry using universities. And so I was at the research lab where we provide data scientist tasks to local startup tech firms. They are mostly from Silicon Valley. And those firms may have a great product in mind, like they are programmers, software engineers, so they come up with great apps or whatever. But they do not really have the capacity to improve their product in a data-driven manner. And that's very important in the tech company because they always run the product improvement. That's the key. They run A/B tests all the time. They use massive big data to evaluate their product. So product improvement is key for the survival of new startup tech company. However, those startups, they have idea, but they don't have a capacity to evaluate the product for the better product. So, and then but they have a massive data, but they kind of have waste in their data. So our lab at that time is to help them evaluate their product by analyzing big data they have. And to do so, we utilize the knowledge talents of Stanford University, like undergrad, graduate student. They are very smart people, and then they know how to run the AI program, machine learning, whatever. And it's kind of win-win situation because students, they like to have kind of real hands-on experience before going to industry. So it's a great, education training as well. So that's like a example of knowledge spillover I was talking about. So those startup firms, they come to the lab looking for ideas for product evaluation, and the university responded by providing the knowledge they're looking for. And what I like to point out is that even post-corona, post-COVID, people say geographic proximity is not important, but I think it still matters. And what happened, I think it actually attracted the lab attract clients from all over the world, but at the same time, many are from from Silicon Valley. And then, so I think this is like an example of Stanford University, but this lab is, funded by, private grant, but maybe what government can do is the government can provide grants so that individual faculty can start up that kind of lab to provide knowledge support to startup companies like local firms. There are so many firms that need that kind of help, but that's not like knowledge is not available anywhere. So I think that's one way. I think that's it's a very micro level example, but I think it has a lots of interesting implication coming out of this example that many countries can adopt. So that's kind of my 2 cents example of like a successful example of university and then private relationship, like a partnership.
Thank you so much. I think it's more than 2 cents, $1 million. Thank you so much, 3 doctors, giving us national and international perspectives. Such a privilege to moderate this session. So thank you so much. And I'm going to hand over to Abdulaziz. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
The resident representative from UNDP, Hadi Kohezilic, for this interesting session. Now, dear audience, we'll leave you now for a break, and we're going to start at 11:45. استراحة لمدة 7 دقائق للساعة 11:45 ومن ثم نعود. استراحة وراجع لكم إن شاء الله.